Hey, podcast listeners. Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcast? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free news. That's amazon.com/ad-free news to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
The apple tree in Jim's garden had brought him years of joy. It had been a goalpost, a shading spot, and a hiding place.
A little pruning and it'll come back stronger than ever. It's gone a bit wild. Just a few of these taller branches and we're done.
Always ask yourself the question, are you sure it's safe? Look out for electricity wires above and below you. If in doubt, call us on 1-800-372-999. ESB Networks. Stay safe and stay clear of electricity wires.
Hey, podcast listeners. Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcast? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free news. That's amazon.com/ad-free news to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast. It is a lovely day. It is a fall day. It is probably, at the time of this comes out, it is probably starting to get cool. And it's a good time to take a step back and just think about gardening. And so you're here at the Backyard Gardens podcast where we think about gardening. If you'd like to support the show, please check us out, become a subscriber, or you can purchase some seeds. Link is below. So be sure to check that out. And yeah, we are so happy you're here with us. And we're going to talk about square foot gardening. It's not really a how-to. You can put together a how-to, but I feel like, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, Batavia, I think this is the common method most people know about.
Yeah, but I thought this was like the dark side of square foot gardening. That was the working title, no? And the voice.
I wasn't going to tell everybody that. I wasn't going to tell everybody off the jump street. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's an older method, not so like the 1300s older, but it's also a popular method as far as people like knowing it, hearing it. It's catchy, right?
Yeah. It's very catchy, but spoiler alert right off the bat, it's very misleading. Mm-hmm. That was my main issue with it. And as I've grown in gardening, I've accepted parts of it. I don't subscribe to any singular gardening method. That's my thing. I just don't. I combine and I mix and match, and what works for me, I do. You're pretty strict with it, aren't you?
No.
No?
No, my entire garden isn't built through square foot gardening. There's some pieces of it, like I'll create a grid, which we'll talk about a little bit more, in some beds because it's convenient. And I just like there's a calmness that comes over me when I see the grid there. And I'm planting along those lines, but I don't follow all of the rules when it comes to the guidelines and recommendations for plants of this type go into this square foot by this number and so on. So I use it loosely in my garden.
Right. Yeah. And when I first learned about or heard the term square foot gardening, I immediately did not read anything about it and just like, that's what I'm doing. And it was, my impression was every plant went in a square foot. One plant went in a square foot. Mm-hmm. And I was wrong. And I struggled with that for a long time. But the big draw to it with me was it's really designed for small garden, like maximum output for a small garden. And that's a sexy, sexy sentence right there, if you ask me. A lot of us are not working with acreage. Mm-hmm. we are working with square footage, so it goes hand in hand. So, do you want to explain what square foot gardening is, Batavia?
Sure.
Just to kind of get it out of the way.
Yeah. So it's a method of gardening. There are many methods of gardening, but it's specific to what you're planting and where. So my written definition that I worked on in advance of the dark side of square foot gardening. I'm going to keep on dripping that in there. You're basically dividing your planting space into 1 by 1 foot squares, right? And the design is you're planting in each of these 1 foot by 1 foot spaces, and the square foot garden guidelines tell you things like, X number of carrot seeds, ultimately carrot plants, can be planted in a square foot versus, let's say, 1 pepper plant is planted in a square foot. So that's the part that's, I believe, generally misleading. Like, it's not one single plant goes into every square foot. And to be quite frank, there are plants that need more growing space than a square foot, like plainly put.
Yeah, not only is there plants that you put in, you can't put just one plant in a square foot, but there's other plants that you can put way more in a square foot. So, it's kind of, a mixed bag of what you can get. And we'll go into a short list later on in the show. Excuse me.
And before we dig into the next topic.
And I think also...
Oh, we're overlapping a little bit. You're blurry, too.
Yeah, we are.
Like blurred lines. Like, there's old controversy around that. Shout out to Mel Bartholomew, who is said to be the creator of square foot gardening.
Yep, absolutely. And one thing, too, is you made me lose my line of thought with the blurred lines comment. Sorry. I don't remember what it was, so go ahead.
That's okay.
Oh, I know what it is now. It came back. One thing that I do remember when I read the book by Mr. Mel Bartholomew, awesome last name, by the way. Really like it.
That's it.
I'm digging it.
Not to be confused with a Spice Girl.
Mel Brooks.
I
was thinking of the director. It was really, and the reason why Batavia, every time I think of square foot gardening, I think of Batavia. Because in the book, it clearly states on a concrete patio, you put a raised bed and you can grow. Like, it clearly states that. And that's what Batavia has done. So I think about that, and I think about the amount of people who move into a place and, you get some crappy concrete patio. You could rip it up, but look, that's a nightmare. So it's like, that was really eye-opening to me. I've never had to deal with that, but reading that was very important because it meant that it showed that there was a lot of space and a lot of chance for people to do these things and to have a garden in somewhere where you wouldn't think there is a space. So that's a really good concept of the square foot. The other thing that I wanted to bring up too, and Batavia said it, is you can make grids in your beds. There's a multitude of ways you can do it. You can use wood, you can use string, you can whatever. The only thing I don't really like about that right off the bat is it's very constricting when you put like a permanent structure down to mark square footage. Do you know what I'm saying?
I put nails, like little bitty fine, like think about like picture frame nails. Like I'm sure there is a actual name for this type of nail, but really small, like to basically tie my string to for my wooden beds. And it's a pain for a couple of reasons. Like as I've continued to develop in gardening and I've used other resources, I always get things hung on the nails, right? The string is what I use. It's not permanent, obviously. I'm just weaving the string into these square foot spaces. But when I try to work up the beds, add, let's say a couple of bags of compost and things, I like to take a hard rake and work that stuff in. And I basically end up putting in my grid every single year and think about my grid times X number of beds. So that's why I've generally moved away from that.
Yeah.
And we could talk about kind of how I still use those principles. However, I have kind of cheated the square foot gardening system a bit.
Yeah. So the size nail that I would get a small pack of, depending on the size of your garden, framing nails is what I would get. They're thin. They don't have a really big head on them. So you could do that. Or you could get like a 10 penny nail. They have a bigger head on them, which if you want to use string would be good because the string wouldn't pull up as easy. So you could use something like that. And use galvanized because it'd be a more permanent solution. But, one thing, and over the years and I don't use square foot gardening as a method, generally speaking, but what I do is I still think of in a square foot, how many plants can go. I'm not hardcore about it by any stretch of the imagination, but it has definitely ingrained in my head to where I use it a lot to say, I can put X amount of this in a square foot. I can put one of this in a square foot. This will take up a certain amount in a square foot. Because if you look out in like a field or something like that, like if you went to a tomato farm, they're not planted by square feet necessarily. They're planted in linear feet because they have room for that row spacing. You always read like plant 3 plants in a row and every 2 feet and give a 3 foot in between each rows. And a lot of us don't, if I did that, I wouldn't have any room in my garden. So, this is a good method to combine amongst others. So I do like it for that aspect, but there's a lot of the square foot garden that we'll get in. We're going to talk about the advantages first, and then we're going to get into the disadvantages, which is stuff we don't like about it. But as far as like an advantage of a square foot garden, what do you think the biggest advantage is for you, Batavia?
I think when I first started using it, it gave me permission to plant more. Right. I trusted it as a guide for, you can actually put in, 9 cilantro plants into this space where I may have, and some of the seed packets give you some instructions on it, but I may have been uncertain about it. So it gave me kind of a permission to say, all right, this makes sense. This is almost like proven, to work when it comes to spacing. And then it also helped me look at, how should I say, like, it's a pretty cool reference to different kinds of things you can consider growing. Like a part of my, front yard garden now and backyard garden, I always kind of have this feeling of, I don't necessarily have enough space to plant X. Like I should really have more space to plant X. And I think early on when I started looking at square foot gardening, it kind of I was able to move beyond kind of the restrictions in my head. I think also it created a sense of order in my garden, versus what could be perceived as chaos sometimes. So that was helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit of organization goes a long way. If nothing else, just those visual lines and stuff like that, they make a big, big difference. I agree with that completely. And I'll also agree with you about the giving you permission to plant more. It's when I first started, it was really confusing to me how much to put into my garden. For just the basic reason of, it's hard to imagine how big a plant's going to get, and when you put a seedling in, it's very misleading. But it allows for you to have a guideline, I would say, of like, and I'm trying not to blur the lines here. I hope that's not the common saying for this, but for this episode. But it gives you guidelines in which you can kind of start to envision how things are going to go. So I do really like that aspect of it, and I think it's a good primer for somebody. I mean, when you get into the art of gardening, there's a lot that goes into it. And I mean, look, we're going to do a full episode on spacing, and what we're kind of doing here is we're going to not in a row, like episode after episode after episode, but throughout the winter, we'll talk about different methods and kind of discuss them, because one thing that I see is people get really ingrained in a method, And it's in my opinion, it's very limiting to be ingrained. Like square foot gardening, here we go, blurring the lines again, can be very limiting to an extent. But I remember the year that I first grew carrots, I planted 1 square foot of carrots. That was what I started with. And what I got out of that square foot changed the way I look at that garden forever. It'll never be the same, because this was before I started doing all the same crops in the beds and stuff like that. And I just put in 1 square foot in the middle of my bed of carrots. And I may have done 2 square feet, to be honest. But I remember when I pulled it out, I could not believe the poundage that came out of it. And it wasn't like I got 100 pounds by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, each of my beds are 32 square feet. They're 4 by 8.
Hey, podcast listeners. Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free, or go to amazon.com/ad-free news. That's amazon.com/ad-free news to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
And there's a reason why they are set up that way, because it's easy to replicate. You know, repetition it's the key to success. So I do 32 square feet. So I know that I have, in theory, let's just take for a minute that each plant goes into a square foot. There's an opportunity for 32 plants to go in there. Now, at the time when I did the carrots, I was still kind of operating on that. My opinion and what I knew about square foot gardening was kind of evolving at the time. And when I put it in there and I saw that come out, it changed the way I looked at a garden forever. I'll never look at them the same, because what I thought was limiting in the amount of space I had, because again, even at the time, my garden was half the size it is now. I was able to significantly increase my yield from that garden bed. And it grew exponentially from there to where I started trying other crops that could go into tight spaces and be planted closer together. So I really do like that. If nothing else, just that one experience would change in the game. But at the same token, there was other issues. So that's a really good one. The organization, the guidelines and stuff like that. I've never put a grid in my bed. What I have done is I went out and before I replaced my my bed frames, I spray painted lines every square foot so I could at least visually connect across. And that was helpful. So I did that too. And, you know, just putting in, and I'm not even talking about seeding at this point. I'm talking about putting in like actual plants like tomatoes and peppers and broccolis and stuff like that. At that same year, I think it was the year before, I really adopted it in the spring, and I planted a bed to the square foot garden plan. And I was surprised on what I could get in there. I mean, I packed a lot of stuff in there. So it was very useful in that aspect. And then planning wise, I really like that too. I like the planning portion of it. So that really helps. Yeah,
I was looking back and I bought the Square Foot Gardening book in the summer of 2018. And that it's on track when it comes to kind of the stages I've gone through for gardening. So remember, the front yard garden basically was created the summer of 2019. So for a year later, basically. But I had terrible sketches of it from years prior. I think it started maybe in 2016. I say that to say this was like, you know, a couple of years prior to purchasing the book was the beginning of the curiosity around what else I could grow, you know, how I could best use my space. And you mentioned earlier on about how, generally speaking, you know, this is designed for smaller footprints for a garden. Right. It speaks to those type of gardeners more so. And it really kind of the theme of that really helped me when I look at some of the charts out there, because there are a bunch of different charts when it comes to, you can fit all of these things in a square foot space. Like, it was helpful to say, oh, okay, I'd never really thought about growing, fennel. I've never grown fennel, but just as a random example. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, if I wanted to grow it, then I could grow 2 of them in a square foot, I think that ironically it was like a byproduct of the square foot gardening method, was that it helped me hone in on some of the things that I was interested in growing. Remember, I just knew that I wanted to grow more, and there are a couple of things that I really had my eye on. But when it came to opening up, the possibilities, one could argue they're endless, but I had to try to hone them in some way,
What were you eyeing at the time? Do you remember? What were you eyeing at the time?
As far as what type of vegetable?
Yeah, what at that time, what were you kind of wanting to plant that this helped you to get?
I don't know. I don't remember. I do believe that it was more of the same of what I was growing, just more of it. I definitely think there were things, if I look at kind of in 2019, so a year later after buying the book, I think I planted pretty much, because it was pretty late in the season, midway the year, then I actually broke ground, no pun intended, on the front yard garden. I planted a lot of the same things I had been planting. And then it was the following year, in 2019, I was able to plant for 2020. And that's when it's I want to grow potatoes. So this is probably more to your question, but I think it took me a little bit longer to get there, to hone in on, all right, I could have 32 different crops here in this 4x8 foot bed if I wanted. My beds are a little bit different in size, but do I really want to grow 32? What do I really want to grow? So things I had grown okra prior, but things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, right? The concept of, could I really grow corn? It took me a couple of years to actually give it a try. It still was centered in a lot of the vegetables that I ate, but it wasn't a part of my everyday diet,
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's the part of gardening too that's fascinating, is our curiosity gets us eventually. You start graduating away from certain plants and wanting to try something different, or somebody gives you a pack of seeds, or, some company will send you a free pack. You're like, yeah, what the heck? I'll try it. And to have that guideline for planting, and it's a shame that a lot of the seed packets don't give you a square foot guideline, because it shows really how out of touch companies are with their clientele, because most of us are into square foot. We're not square foot gardening, but we're working with square footage, not acreage, For instance, I was packaging the corn seeds the other day. So we're going to have king corn, not queen, king, silver king corn.
I fought the good fight,
I believe is the name of it.
Guys and gals.
Yeah. I don't know how we ended up. Anyways, we ended up on it. And I packaged them up. And when I was doing it, I put 64 seeds in one package. Should be enough for one 32 square foot bed exactly, right? So you don't have the leftovers and stuff like that. But a lot of times you get, it's and I gave you the example, this many in a row, this distance in between each row, but then you give into the square footage aspect, and then you kind of start to put it together a little bit better. You can visualize it a lot more. And that's a lot like the planner app. It's not a square foot gardening app. It is designed in square feet because it makes sense for square feet. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to be all right, you have 32 linear feet this way and, doing all these calculations and stuff like that. You can break it down. For me, my actual foot is right about 12 inches long. So when I need to measure a square foot, I stick my foot in the garden, and I can get that way. You can have a 1 foot stick or something like that. Why are you laughing?
I'm looking to replace a rug in my bedroom, and I can't even imagine how old that rug is. That's not the point. And so my feet aren't 12 feet, but I was trying to walk out how, wide and long the rug was because my measuring tapes are downstairs. And so this is literally this morning.
So you're pacing it out. Yeah. I mean, I pace out everything. So, it's just it's a really good way to visualize it, which, I mean, look, let's take a second here and tell you about the Planner app because it's the visual aspect of it. That's what draws us to the Planner app is that square foot interface. I told you, I don't do square foot gardening as a whole, but as a guide, that square foot and that visual reference makes it a lot easier to plan out your whole garden. And that's the benefit of this. It's available on the Google and Apple Play Store. It's drag and drop. It's color coded for combative and companion planning. Check the link below, get yourself the discount and use it. You won't be sorry. We live by it in our gardens for good reason. And again, it's not a square foot gardening necessarily app, but it just makes sense to use it, right? And I mean, we did a thing where one of our listeners asked the question of how do you cheat the spacing in it? And there is a workaround that's in there to cheat the visual spacing of it because they realize that not everybody's a square foot gardener. And the real, let's be real, it's not a perfect system. It sounds perfect. It looks perfect on paper, but in nature, the way things grow, it ain't perfect, So, big disadvantage for me right off the bat was not everything goes in a square foot. One plant could take up 4 square feet. And I didn't realize that at first. Now, that was operator error. I'm not going to lie, but it's just very misleading. And there was some working out to be done there. Oh, wait, I got one other benefit. I forgot. It's the way that you pack vegetables in is designed also to help suppress weeds, to shade them out. So that's a really big portion of it too, now the lines aren't blurred anymore because I'm just going to say it right off the bat. The downside of that is there's a lot of overcrowding that can occur very easily in a garden when you're square foot gardening.
I have a few different comments that I'll try to make succinct. If I had to do it over again and I had the ability,
I hate that term.
No, it's you can't. That's not a thing, right? If I had to do it again. I love that your beds are 4 foot by 8 foot, flat out. That calms my mind. The amount of times that I've measured and remeasured my beds, they are all kinds of sizes. Now there's some beds in my space that I could have made the exact same. The reason why I love that is it's an opportunity to remove some of the friction. To plainly put, you have 32 square feet in each of these beds. Anytime when you're rotating your crops, the last bed is the same space as the next place they're going. My beds in the concrete patio, they're no longer than 7 feet. You'll never guess why.
Why?
I don't have a pickup truck. My the sports utility trucks that are all over the streets now. So I have one of those. And when I got wood cut, I could get a 7-foot piece of wood from my dashboard all the way to the back of my truck. And I was nervous about tying it down, opening the trunk and tying it down. So 8-footer would have just been too long. So then all of my beds started to be 7 feet long. The one bed in the cage baby that's 12 feet, a friend built those for me. And I was a nervous Nelly all the way home because the trunk was open and that, the 12-footer was exposed. Yeah. But I look at something like that and say, if I were building beds over, I would choose some common size for the purpose of moving crops around. Now, remember, when I was planting out, originally building these beds, I was adding in onesie twosies. So it was like, all right, I'm going to add one more bed. I didn't really think about, what about the next bed size and the next bed size? And of course, I've had opportunities to replace some of that wood too. But then it leans into if you want to use square foot gardening, like it's laid out for you. I think simplification is the descriptor I'll use when I look at something like your 8 foot by 12 foot bed or 8 foot by 4 foot beds.
Yeah, I mean, it was for, do you know why I used 8x4? Because a board is 8 foot long. I could buy 3 boards, cut one in half.
Hey, podcast listeners. Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free news. That's amazon.com/ad-free news to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
And there was zero waste, super easy. Really, almost didn't even have to measure it. I did measure it, but that's why I went with the 4x8. So I forgot how we got on
you were
that.
talking. You had one more benefit about the crowding.
Oh yeah,
but also generally the design is to help suppress weeds because there's not a lot of soil exposed. One of the other comments, I got so wrapped up in the 4 foot by 8 foot beds. Shorter goes to longer. Yeah. I was looking at a chart that we have here when it comes to, suggestions of vegetables to plant and thinking about like in the chart how it crosses many seasons. So it's not meant to say plant all of these things in this huge bed. But then also, I don't remember if in the book it states this, but, harvesting early and often will benefit you if you're growing in a square foot space, like using a square foot gardening principles, like letting plants get overgrown. Like that's not the move here. So that's it.
One thing too that I don't like about it is it overly complicates the garden as well. So, and I know it's kind of contradicted to what I said, where it's like, it's a really nice guideline, this, that, and the other. But then you start thinking about the amount of space and you can go crazy in it. And what ended up happening to me is that I have a square foot of this and a square foot of that and a square foot of this and a square foot of, A, B, C, D, E, and just all the way across to where I could not keep up with what was actually going on in my garden, what was the harvest when, this, that, and the other. And again, a lot of this is definitely like how you handle it. I'm going to be straight up. It was piss poor planning on my part because I didn't have an actual like guide to help me, like the planner app. What I had was just me kind of throwing stuff at the wall saying, oh my gosh, this bed that I've been planning in, now I can get 3 times as much stuff in. Mm-hmm. What can I do? So what I ended up doing is I'd get a few beans. I would get a whole lot of basil, and then I would get a cabbage and a broccoli. But what I came to realize was I'm not really doing anything. I'm not really producing anything. I'm producing stuff, but like, what am I going to do with one head of broccoli? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like all this time and I got one head of like, what's the story here? And so I started graduating away from it. As quickly as I got into it, I started leaving it. We had to get a divorce. It had to happen. And I started doing more and more and kind of spreading it out. I would see a lot of pictures of people's gardens that were square foot designed, and it was magnificent. But what I came to realize is they were magnificent for pictures and not magnificent for purpose. There was no real purpose behind it. And once I started kind of moving away from like plotting each and individual plant everywhere, things started to change for me dramatically.
There's also there's a sense of freedom that it gave me early on as I was kind of transitioning from a gardener that was growing tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, okra. Like those were the things that were in my earlier gardens, so transitioning from that, maybe some beans, right? A couple of herbs here and there, to I'm interested in growing other things. I have some vegetables in mind. Maybe not. I want to use more space to grow. So again, it gave me some guidance, right? And then as I kind of got some at-bats, with these vegetables growing in these spaces, I can kind of see the idea of like it creates a restrictive mindset too. So it is talking out of both sides, but I can see how, you progress in your gardening and then it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, no, that doesn't quite work for me. The square foot garden, I don't see them as much on, and I think it's just with my feed. The pictures always look so great, like about 1 to 2 months after planting, and then it's like things get big and bushy, and not only do you lose the grid, things start to get intertwined, and so like the sexiness of it, like the order of it, it's like nature basically takes over, at some point, 60 days after planting.
Well, it truly does. And and what I came to realize, later in life was, those pictures I was seeing were curated, perfect timings. You didn't see, when one's empty and the square foot's empty and, there's 3 or 4 plants missing and there's gaps and stuff like that, which is, look, that's totally normal in a garden too. Absolutely normal to have things missing, have gaps and stuff like that. It never has to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. One of the other disadvantages I came across, and again, this was just my own unfortunate interpretation of the method, was everything went in a square foot. So I was under the impression that it was a melon goes in a square foot, a tomato goes in a square foot, an onion goes in a square foot. And I had to kind of graduate away from that. And even then, it still got a little bit more confusing because, for instance, melons take up about a square foot, right? 2 square feet. Let's say 2 square feet. But and I know that the plant does not take up 2 square feet. It takes up 20 square feet. So when I looked at it, and you didn't go into too much detail, especially like vining crops and stuff like that. Beans, not really, because everybody knows they go on trellises. But melons, what's another vining crop? Squashes. I'm blanking. I think that's really about it. I put those in the ground and I'm like, well, why isn't my plant staying in this 2 square feet? What's going on? This is what the guide was. Well, what I didn't realize, and this is especially for tomatoes, is there's a lot of trimming that's involved in the plant. A lot of maintenance that goes to keep it confined for the most part into that square footage. And that's something that I came to realize I was cutting too much off of my tomatoes, for instance, to keep them contained. And what I ended up doing was sacrificing my harvest, because what was happening was I would trim it and then the plant would be like, no, we need to put on more leaves, and it wouldn't focus on fruit, so it would focus on leaves. And as I started, same varieties, same seeds, the next year, everything was the same except for the trimming and the spacing. I started to get more and more and more produce out of my garden. I was being more productive. So, and it's not like that for everything, but for key plants, it's really important.
I missed the question. You were frozen.
No, I was just passing it over to you.
Sorry, guys and gals. Sorry, Bid. I was looking back at, I'm trying to find the year, this new
I saw you searching.
phone update. I'm not one to complain about these kinds of things, but this really has made it difficult for me to navigate my pictures because it's so different. And I've not really figured out how do I search by year and for the term garden? And so I have this is it looks like May of 2020, I was still using the grid. I can see the string here, and I have...
Yeah. I remember you having the grid in your garden.
Yeah. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my 4 by 7 footish bed, I put into, let's see, 4 rows, 4 square feet, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. So I got 28 out of that. And it looks like this bed is planted with collards, peppers, and a couple of pole beans, which is wild because this is a bush beans. Correct myself. I bought those bush beans. Shame on me. I'm looking at them. I'm hoping the store gave them to me for free because I can see the tag there. So it helped me kind of navigate what works and what doesn't work. Now that in 2017, I'm looking at, so that had been the year before I bought it. I have an old mop head and like some old stick that created like the lines for the beds that I'm actually working in. I feel like you almost, it works well when you are trying to figure out what works well for you as a gardener. It obviously also assumes, which we do a lot in our talk, is that people are gardening in raised beds versus in ground versus containers, right? Like this really works if it's going to work. It works for you when you have a designated square or rectangle, I should say. Everyone doesn't garden in that same way. But are we still at the disadvantages?
Yeah, well, no, that's kind of, there's a multitude of them. And a lot of it really comes down to the way you plan your garden and the knowledge you have for your plants. So, I was going to mention fertilizing would be difficult because the way you could plant, but really that comes down to the individual gardener not really planning it out right and stuff like that. So that's not really a disadvantage. I want to get into spacing a little bit for this. We pulled up a chart. We went to squarefootgardening.org. It's the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. I'll try and get Leonard to put a link in the show notes for you so you can look. And it gives you a pretty good idea of what you can get. But even in this, I'm finding stuff that's very misleading in this chart that they have. I don't know if they have all the vegetables, but they've got a fair amount of them in here. And I was scrolling through when I was talking, and I was looking, and for instance, it says here, in a square foot, you can put 16 mustard greens. That's incredibly tight. I put 2 in, and they grow and they are overlapping. So, you go through and it's like they also have mint in here. So you can put 1 mint in a square foot. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you a piece of advice. If you put mint in 1 square foot of your garden, you will have 32 square feet of mint in a 30 square foot garden. It will take over the whole thing, so it's like I guess it's good to know that you could put it in a square foot, but that's the part that really and I'm serious. If you put mint in your garden, you will mess up your garden bed. Am I wrong, Batavia?
I'm surprised that I ever got mint out of the bed that I just talked about for the square foot gardening. I planted it. It looks like maybe I got it. No. I planted it prior to that 2020 grid, and it was still in my garden in 2020. Right. But at the initial planting, it didn't appear that way. But guess what? It always comes back.
Yeah. And they've got potatoes in here that are 4 per square foot. I put 1 per square foot last time. So 25, or what is that? 75% less. And that was enough, because what ended up happening was the plants were getting so big, they were just taken over. And they were, if they were any closer, it would have been a disease factory. It would have really propagated disease a lot in there. So typically what I do, and I don't have the chart memorized, but I've got really good, and a lot of it's from using the Planter app, to be honest, because it's just I see it over and over again. I've been telling my son, repetition, do it over and over. because I see it so much. I've kind of got a really good idea of what goes in a square foot, and I typically I give it a little bit more space. You know, a tomato takes, if you put a tomato, it takes 4 square feet. So I typically will give it 4.5, maybe, just a little bit of extra, and I still have overlappage bad, but it's not terrible. But if you pack them in there like that, you really can get, and the problem, like for me, is in July, I get tomato diseases like everybody else does in my area, and that disease will jump from plant to plant really fast. There's no barrier from that because they're touching. So, and I mean, I literally would see disease on this plant and then disease on this part of the next plant that's touching the other plant. Like I would see that happen. And that was my indication that like I needed to kind of alter this method a little bit for some things.
I look at something like anytime they have 1 plant per square foot, generally speaking, that works. There are things that are grow in bush-like form, vining crops, you know, that once they get to size, they're going to cover more than 1 foot of, 1 square foot, which means if you planted something directly next to it, that thing is likely getting shaded out. I think once they get to the point of things that are like 2, 3, 4 in a square foot, like it's pretty close to my experience in being accurate. I think the potatoes is one that was off. Once we get to things that are 9, 10 and above, I basically am like, I'll do half of that. Right? Like, carrots is the one I keep on getting drawn to, and it's like 16 per square foot. Radish is 16 per square foot. And sure, you can have, the greens of either of those plants grow, but think about how large a carrot's going to be. You know, the root is what you're growing it for. Think about how large it's going to be. The size of your carrot obviously is based on the variety, but also critically important how much space you let that single carrot get. So 16 pencil size carrots, yeah. I mean, that's what you're going for, then, that's what you're going to get, So I'd go less for something like carrots because I want to give my carrots more room to grow.
Preach it, sister. There's a cake of bacon in the oven for you. Damn. Ladies and gentlemen, the best part of this show for me is when I think of something and Batavia knows that I've thought of it and she brings it up and opens the door. Because, and I thought about this probably 5 minutes before, and I was just like, I don't know when to bring it up. But disadvantage numero uno is it doesn't account for root space. And the carrot is such a good example because we're eating the root, and the amount that you put in that space is going to determine how big that carrot's going to be. Look, I saw that video. I'm going to bring it up again where you pulled that carrot up next to that cabbage. You had your carrots widely spaced. It looked like a Bugs Bunny carrot. Like straight out the gate. Like I'm not even like lying. It looked like a Bugs Bunny carrot because she gave it plenty of space. I came
back in and thinned those after I sowed those seeds that spring with the intention of I wanted to make sure I gave them more space. But guess what? It was because I had previous experience of crowding carrots and I knew what I got when I crowded them. It's really, it's still hard for me to believe. Maybe I'm going to scour, I'm not even going to bother asking Leonard. I'm going to scour the internet to see if there's an example of somebody with 16 carrots in a square foot space. You got to see what they're pulling out of there. Like I know what size carrots can get across a number of varieties, and I just don't see it. And so I struggle with how this made it in the book even, how this made it on the site.
Yeah, it's crazy because what we don't see underground dictates a big majority of what happens above ground. And if you don't have the root space that the plants need, you're not going to get the output that you desire. Not even what you desire, what you deserve for the effort that you put into it. Okay. I agree with the 16 carrots. It's a lot. I'm going to be totally honest. It's hard to get an exact number of carrots in a space. Pull them one seed out at a time. Like, cut it out, especially if you're doing row after row. It gets mind numbing to do it. Because it's a plant that needs to be direct seeded.
Yeah, you're direct.
You can't really transplant.
Yeah, you're direct seeding it, and then also it's such a trick bag. That's the reason why people are so impressed when you get good carrots, like you yourself as a gardener, because even if you sow heavily, which is generally recommended, you still have to be careful when you're coming back into thin. Right. And if you sow, like if you take the time and put one seed in the space you wanted, there's no guarantee that each of those seeds are going to germinate. So guess what you're doing? You're going to be coming back in and re-sowing in those gaps. Like it's a bit of a pain.
Yeah. Well, and if you're sowing one seed at a time, you're never going to get a harvest because you're never going to finish. It's just, it's a nightmare. And the radishes. So, last year, maybe it was last year, I had typically done 16 radishes per square foot, and I went down to 10. And the size radishes I pulled out, it doesn't matter if you plant 16, 20, or 30. It was so much bigger. One radish was the same size as 5 of my previous radishes. I'd never had radishes that big. I did not have a special seed. I did not do anything different. The only thing I did different was I gave it more space. And that was a symbol to me that was like, hey, first of all, I don't have to take care of as many plants. And each one that I pull out is going to give me more. That's what I want. I would rather have a bigger radish that I'm not going to chop the tip of my fingers off when I'm cutting it, and then have a bunch of little radishes, like just plain and simple. So the spacing underground is really, really important. And I was looking at something too. Cucumbers, you can get 2 per square foot. That's a lot of cucumbers, man. Because you're not, usually you're planting a row of cucumbers, no matter what. You got a trellis 4 feet long. I think
that actually works for cucumbers. I think that when you mentioned pruning earlier, like there's also this, and it could be spoken in the book. It's been, clearly I got it in 2018, even with my delay and actually digging into things like that. Like it's been a while since I've looked through and read that book. They may mention it about recommending the pruning. But you also need to think about, promoting disease, like, think about cucumber vines and, airflow and things of that nature. I probably do, because if you look at packages, it's something like, every 6 inches or something, I think. Yeah, it sounds about right. Mm-hmm. You can plant cucumber seeds. So that speaks to 2 in a square foot.
Yeah. Yeah, and even my garlic, I don't plant. It says 9 in a square foot. I don't plant 9 in a square foot. I probably plant 4.
One of the things to note,
and gives it space.
And I do want to spend just a minute on kind of where I transitioned to when I kind of came out of the square foot gardening of it all. Because I realized something like a cabbage needs more than 12 inches from end to end, right? So I do, a cabbage. Ideally, I'd love to do it in 2 square feet, but I never really get to that. So it's like 18 inches apart. I do a lot more rows inside of my garden beds now. I still lean on the idea of I know how many can grow in a particular space or how much is recommended. And I've made adjustments over the years. So my carrots aren't being grown in a square foot. They're being grown in that same bed that I mentioned where I had 4 square feet across. I'm going to grow, if I were to grow carrots in that entire space, I'd grow them in those in basically 4 rows, and probably, I don't know, maybe 4. I'd probably go down as much as 8 instead of 16, so halving that, in a square foot. If I take my rows and kind of turn it back into a square foot, I'd do probably more like 8 in each square foot,
I've got that cedar that I use, and I use it for carrots, and it dumps them out. I mean, it's almost ridiculous how many comes out. I'm going to play around with it this year. I didn't plant carrots for the fall because I found that my spring carrots grew just as fast as my fall carrots. So there was really no point in me putting them in the ground early. So I think what I'll do this year is I want to try and do like one row with the cedar, but bigger spacing. And then I think I'm going to hand seed another row and see how that works out for me. And I mean, look, when I hand seed carrots, I'm literally going to put a pinch in every 4 inches maybe and see how that goes. And see if it makes a difference. I don't know. And then I can, because if I have that visual separation in between the carrots, because I mean, that's the big thing with the carrots is it just ends up being a mass of greenery. But if I have like an individual separation, I can kind of thin out a little bit better. And hopefully, I mean, look, carrots is a good example too. I would rather have a nice sized carrot than a bunch of baby carrots personally. I've done a couple years of just baby carrots to the point to where I'm like, I don't even want to grow carrots anymore, but I love carrot. My son eats them all the time. So I kind of have to keep making them or growing them. So I'm going to play around with the spacing a little bit on that and see if it makes a difference. And I know it's going to make a difference, but just see, I really want the cedar to do the work for me instead of me do the work. It's a pain in the back, literally, to do it. So, but look, we got to get to the listener question of the day. I got one from the Backyard Gardens Community Garden on Facebook. Feel free to come join us. It's free. No issues there. And join the conversation. Post a picture of your garden. Have fun. But I believe it's pronounced Avi. A-V-I?
Avi. Hey, Avi. Or hey, Avi.
So she says that she has peppers that just started fruiting and wants to know, what can I do to bring them in the house to let them continue? She's in zone 5B.
Mm-hmm. So in my zone neck of the woods, did I hear that it was in a container? Oh,
no.
Shoot. All right. Well, so you can dig up. So you're saying that the person didn't say explicitly it was in a container, or that was in a raised bed?
To say, I want to bring them into the house to let them continue.
So if it's in a container, I've never done this. I don't have the capacity at the end of the year to do this. And I'm also concerned about bringing in bugs. Although I used to bring out houseplants and bring them back in, and I felt like it was fine. So I've seen some people wash roots off in an attempt to like kind of sterilize things and put it in fresh dirt and bring it in. I've seen some people prune the thing all the way down. So if you were to dig it up out of a raised bed or in-ground space.
She wants to get the harvest off of what's already on there.
All right, so harvest what's already on there.
No, she wants to bring it in so it'll continue to grow to get the harvest.
Oh, well, you're tripping, Avi.
Damn, you messed up with one sentence.
Well, it's hard for me with the connection we have here. It's hard for me to get all of that question, so apologies. So I've done this in part. So I would trim any leaves that aren't producing. So I do a pruning of them. If this isn't in a container, Ivy, you just harvest what you got and keep on going. I'm going to assume it's in a container.
Yeah.
You're able to do a bit of pruning. I do a heavy water, maybe a week or two before you plan on bringing them inside. The most lit space that you have, I'm not convinced, to be quite frank, that there's going to be more growth if she just wants to harvest what's there to avoid, kind of whatever your cold temperatures are coming in at. It's just delaying the harvest. There's not going to be a lot more of maturing that happens. I just don't think you're going to get enough sunlight inside. But you can have it live in, your kitchen next to the window, and if you have like a picture frame window in your living room or something, you could have it sit there. Like that's it, like I don't know if I'm missing something here.
Well, I mean, if I could step in here.
Please do.
I got a lot of people asking about overwintering peppers.
But that's not what they're asking, right?
No, not really. But if you have a plant, I mean, you got to think, if you take a plant and you pull it out of the ground and you put it in a pot and you bring it inside, you're shocking the plant. So it's going to stop doing what it's doing. If you don't have a grow light, I wouldn't even attempt it, because you're just not going to get enough sun. You need to have some kind of grow light in there. And what I would do, if this is something you really wanted to do, is I would take a shovel and I would dig out around, and I mean, your goal is not to lose any roots whatsoever. You know, the fewer roots you leave, the better, and be super gentle getting it out. Minimize the transplant shock. Get it in a big pot, put it inside, repot it, put it under a grow light, 18 hours a day on, 6 hours a day off, keep it watered and let it ride and see what happens. I'm not big into overwintering peppers because it's too much. I'm just not concerned about it. What I can say, if you take this as Avi, as a learning experience, and if they're just starting to produce, so this, at the time of reading, this was posted 2 weeks ago, so that would be right around the second week of October. Adjust your planting times. So in the spring, plant it earlier if you can, and do it that way. If you're starting them from seed, up pot, plant out. If you're trying to get them to grow, I'm imagining you kind of have a short summer in 5B, but it's really hard to get a plant to continue, because when it starts to fruit, it's just gotten comfortable and it's starting to do its thing, and then you're going to rip it up. And I use the term rip it up just for dramatic reasons. But you're going to put it and you're going to give it all that shock. And even if you did keep every single root and the repotting process had zero shock, changing that light and that environment is going to shock it as well. So it's a really hard thing to do. I would take it as a learning experience and just replant earlier. But there's always, as Batavia says, it's a good garden experiment to see what you can get out of it. And it also depends on the pepper. If it's a pepper that produces really small peppers, you have a better chance than if you're trying to produce really big bell peppers. Those are going to be harder to grow and to actually come to fruition inside of a house. Not impossible, but at this rate, I mean, I think you would almost be better off to start another seed now inside and grow a plant all the way through, and come, let's see, what is it? It's almost November. By March, you should be starting to see some flowers and stuff like that, and trying to do it that way. I think that'd be better off.
Yeah, the challenge here is we're probably answering the question later than there would be any chance of success for it. I would actually do exactly as Young Ben described, with one modification, and that would be I'd leave it outdoors a bit longer to adjust to that new space, that new container.
Yeah.
It's kind of, think about how we harden things off. It's kind of the reverse of that before I bring it indoors, because you want to try to isolate, if you run into a problem, where the problem was, right? So that's the only adjustment that I'd make, I think. It's interesting, like you said, it's an interesting garden experiment. What I have done is, and I'm still missing the piece about how far along this plant is in its growth. I've had plants for peppers that I have been meaning to harvest, didn't get to, frost is coming, and I just cut it down at the soil line, put it into like one of those big Tupperware type containers, and storage containers, like those, box like, dump them in there, and it sat in my dining room for probably 3 or 4 or 5 days, so obviously I've cut the source off from the root, like the root is no longer intact. But the peppers that are on the plant, they're on the plant. Those are some tiny peppers. So I wanted to get in there and take some time to kind of pick them all off of the branches. But again, there is no expectation of continued growth at that point.
Yeah. Yes, survival at that point. So if you'd like to be like Avi and send us a question, you can do so on the Backyard Gardens Community Garden on Facebook, or you can send us an email at bygquestion, no S at the end of question, at gmail.com. There's a link below for that. Before we close out, Batavia, square foot garden, thumbs up or thumbs down?
Sideways thumbs? I think thumbs up. I think that
Sideways?
If you're looking for how, I think it's a good entryway into gardening.
I like sideways. I like sideways. I like that. We went through all of it, so you can make your own decisions. I know there's a lot of people out there that are hardcore square foot gardeners, and hope we didn't offend you. But at the same time, maybe we push you to think about a little bit different and kind of improve what you didn't know could be improved. I'm a believer that it is not the end all to be all to a gardening method. But I do think that it is a very good starting place for you to apply your knowledge, to learn, apply your knowledge that you've gathered over the years and even over the year, and expand upon that and improve it. I think it's a method to be improved upon by the individual gardener. That's my statement. If you'd like to support the show, please pick up some seeds from us. Link is below. Get the Planter app. Support them. They are a great crew. And thank you for listening to the Backyard Gardens podcast, because on this show, we drive to do one thing only, and that's learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens Community Garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia is at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show, or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.